Welcome to True Story Africa. Do you know why you should drop everything you're doing this minute and take the next few minutes watching this video? The real reason? You wouldn't believe me even if I told you. It's a true story, a very heartbreaking story of how 5 teenagers lost their lives, unfortunately, due to circumstances that will leave you with more questions than answers. So stay tuned till the end of the video to find out what really happened. The main highlight of this story is true, but we write our own unique storyline to make it more engaging and interesting. The purpose is to portray the message, not misdirect. Please note. And so, back to our story. In the small but bustling town of Afashio, a community nestled within Edo State, Nigeria, the Suleiman family was widely known, not just because they were wealthy and powerful, but because they were influential, deeply involved in local politics, and well-respected, at least on the surface. Aisha Suleiman, their only child, was the star of their world, doted upon by parents who wanted nothing more than her happiness, and that's exactly what they gave her. At just 16, Aisha already had a life most people could only dream of. Her father, a prominent political figure, made sure his daughter lacked for nothing. She had her own car by the age of 14, an extravagant, gleaming silver vehicle that turned heads at her school. With her easy life, Aisha was known to be a bit spoiled. She didn't hesitate to show her privileged life and was quick to put others in their place if she felt disrespected. But despite her comfortable life, Aisha wasn't just looking for status, she longed for connection and love, especially as she grew older. And one day she met a boy who seemed to be the answer to her heart's desires. The meeting. Aisha first saw Emmanuel at a school event. He was unlike anyone she had ever met. He didn't wear flashy clothes or drive an expensive car, and yet there was a charm in his smile, a warmth in his voice. Emmanuel came from a humble background. His father was a mechanic, a hardworking man who fixed vehicles for meager pay. His mother sold roasted corn by the bus stop, spending long, hot hours over her charcoal stand to make ends meet. The family barely scraped by, but they were a close-knit group who believed in hard work and sacrifice. Emmanuel, now 17, was working hard to finish school. Every penny was precious to him, and he took pride in earning what little he had. When Aisha began showing interest in him, he was both thrilled and nervous. She was beautiful, wealthy, and from a respected family. Basically, she was everything he wasn't. Yet, the chemistry between them was undeniable, and soon they became inseparable. The romance begins. For Aisha, Emmanuel was a thrilling adventure. She adored how different he was from everyone she knew. Unlike the other boys who tried to impress her with money and gifts, Emmanuel didn't pretend to be anything he wasn't. His honesty captivated her, and soon she was head over heels in love. She would often buy him gifts, pay his school fees, and even send groceries to his family home without asking. Her parents were concerned about her growing obsession with Emmanuel, but Aisha brushed off their warnings. To her, this was love, pure, deep, and unbreakable. Emmanuel, however, began feeling something else. This was guilt. He enjoyed Aisha's generosity, but his pride nagged at him. He wasn't comfortable taking so much from her, but every time he tried to speak up, she'd laugh it off and insist. Over time, he began to enjoy the comforts her wealth provided. He even grew accustomed to the admiration he received from friends and neighbors who couldn't believe he was dating the princess of Afashio. But soon, things would change. As the months went by, Aisha, ever generous and loyal, introduced Emmanuel to her close friend, Ada Samuel. Ada was her confidant, a friend she trusted dearly. Ada was strikingly beautiful with a smile that could melt any heart, and her graceful manners endeared her to everyone she met. She came from a modest background as well, and Aisha believed they would become fast friends. But what Aisha didn't expect was that Emmanuel would fall for her friend. The attraction was instant. Emmanuel found himself thinking about Ada more than he should. He couldn't help but notice the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed or how kind-hearted she was. Ada, too, began feeling drawn to him, though she tried to hide it out of loyalty to her friend. Over time, Emmanuel grew distant from Aisha, his attention slowly shifting towards her friend Hada. He felt torn, caught between loyalty to Aisha and the undeniable pull he felt toward her friend. a dangerous plan. Emmanuel and his friends, Samuel and Jeffrey Aiwalo, saw an opportunity in the situation. Samuel and Jeffrey were brothers who had known Emmanuel for years. They were close friends and confidants, but they had their flaws. Samuel, in particular, was clever with schemes, always looking for a way to make quick money, even if it meant bending the rules. Together, they devised a plan to end things with Aisha while benefiting from it financially. The plan was simple but ruthless. Samuel and Jeffrey would create a fake scandal, something that would make Aisha look like she was cheating on Emmanuel. They would use this fabricated betrayal as an excuse for Emmanuel to end the relationship, thereby giving him a straight shot at her friend. However, they needed money to execute the plan, and they decided that Aisha, wealthy and trusting, would be their unwitting source of funding. Emmanuel convinced her to give him large sums of money, claiming he needed it to help his family with unexpected expenses. Blinded by love, Aisha handed over the cash without question. It wasn't long before their plan was set in motion. Samuel and Jeffrey spread rumors about Aisha, planting seeds of doubt in Emmanuel's mind. They even staged scenarios to make it look as if Aisha was being unfaithful. Emmanuel, despite knowing the truth, used this evidence to confront her, leading to an explosive argument. Heartbreak and Rage. When Emmanuel broke up with Aisha, she was devastated. She had poured her heart, her time, and her resources into the relationship. The betrayal cut deeply, and as she pieced together the details of the scheme, she realized the extent to which she'd been manipulated. She felt humiliated, used, and worst of all, heartbroken. A dark, fiery rage began to consume her. She had been loyal, she had loved him with everything she had, and yet he had betrayed her in the worst way. The rage that Aisha felt was like nothing she had ever experienced. It was raw and consuming, a fire that made her feel capable of anything. Thoughts of revenge clouded her mind, and she began to plot. Her mind constantly playing disturbing scenes of Emmanuel and Hada holding on to each other. She felt cheated, she felt scorned. And we all know the famous line from William Congreve's 1697 play, The Mourning Bride, which says, "Heaven has no rage like love to hatred turned, nor hell a fury like a woman scorned." The poison gift. It was Emmanuel's birthday a few weeks later. Aisha saw an opportunity for her revenge and planned it meticulously. She prepared a special meal of fish pepper soup, a dish that was known to be one of his favorites. But this was no ordinary pepper soup. Aisha had laced it with poison. She made arrangements for the meal to be delivered to Emmanuel's apartment. He had been receiving gifts and birthday wishes all day, so when he received the pepper soup, he assumed it was a generous gift from a friend. He didn't suspect a thing. That evening, Emmanuel invited his new girlfriend, Ada, and his friends, Samuel and Jeffrey, to celebrate his birthday. They gathered in his small apartment, laughing, sharing stories, and enjoying the food. Emmanuel had no idea that this seemingly ordinary meal was about to be his last. The deadly celebration. As the evening grew darker, Emmanuel, Ada, Samuel, and Jeffrey sat around in Emmanuel's small apartment, laughing and enjoying each other's company. They dug into the fish pepper soup, unaware of the danger lurking in each spoonful. Emmanuel was the first to taste it, savoring the spices and the rich flavor. He shared the dish generously, passing it around as they celebrated his birthday. Ada, Samuel, and Jeffrey happily joined in, each one taking hearty portions. To them, it was just another evening of joy and laughter, a time to forget their worries and enjoy life. The aroma of the pepper soup filled the air, masking the terrible truth within it. No one suspected a thing. They were blissfully unaware of the deadly poison that was working its way through their bodies. As the night wore on, things took a sudden and horrifying turn. Samuel was the first to feel the effects. His laughter faded, replaced by a look of confusion as he clutched his stomach in pain. Jeffrey noticed his brother's discomfort and asked him what was wrong. But before Samuel could respond, he collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Panic spread through the room as Ada and Emmanuel rushed to help him. But then, one by one, they began to feel the same unbearable pain. Ada clutched Emmanuel's arm, her face contorted in agony. Emmanuel's heart raced as he realized something was terribly wrong. His vision blurred, and he too fell to the ground, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. The last thing they remembered was the sound of each other's labored breathing, the scent of the pepper soup still in the air, and the sudden, chilling silence that followed as one by one, they slipped into unconsciousness. A father's nightmare. The next morning, Emmanuel's father, Mr. Ezekiel, went to check on his son. He hadn't heard from Emmanuel since the previous day, and something didn't feel right. As he arrived at Emmanuel's apartment, a strange silence greeted him. The door was slightly open, and as he stepped inside, the sight before him was nothing short of a nightmare. In the corridor, he found Nuruddin's lifeless body sprawled on the floor. Nuruddin was also a friend of Emmanuel. He stayed in the same apartment building as his friend. Shocked and trembling, he moved further into the apartment, calling out for his son, his voice echoing in the silent rooms. His heart sank as he found his son Emmanuel in the bedroom, lying motionless alongside his girlfriend. His eyes frozen into an icy glaze, his body convulsed. It really was a terrible scene. Both were gone, their faces pale and lifeless. In the sitting room, he discovered Samuel slumped in a chair, still a stone. The entire scene felt surreal, like a horrifying dream he couldn't wake from. Desperately, he called for help, hoping that somehow, by a miracle, they could still be saved. But when they arrived at the hospital, the doctors confirmed the terrible truth. They were all dead. The tragedy shook the small town of Afashio. 5 young lives, vibrant and full of potential, had been snuffed out in one cruel, calculated act. No one could understand how or why such a thing could happen. The news spread quickly, and whispers of poison began circulating. Aisha was very careful on her part. She made sure she covered her tracks perfectly. And so to her, she had executed the perfect deadly payback she believed Emmanuel and her friend deserved for betraying her and swindling her of huge sums of money. The money wasn't actually the issue. It was the betrayal that cut deep. Even after all the years she had showered Emmanuel with all her love and care, he still went on to cheat on her with her best friend. In her angry state, Aisha let a small detail slip. She booked the delivery service anonymously to divert suspicion, but she mistakenly forgot to delete the temporary email she used to register. This was what the men of the police force used to trace back the person who ordered the delivery service. The findings were mind-boggling. All hands were now pointing towards Aisha. It wasn't long before suspicion turned toward Aisha. Rumors spread like wildfire. People speculated about what could have caused such a calamity. Some whispered that it was a curse, perhaps for a wrongdoing. Others said it was a tragic accident, while a few blamed the growing influence of evil forces in the town. But when news broke that Aisha, Emmanuel's ex-girlfriend, was single-handedly responsible, the sorrow turned into outrage. People couldn't believe it at first. How could a girl so young, the daughter of a respected and wealthy politician, be capable of something so monstrous? Aisha's family was well known, and she had always seemed distant from the troubles of everyday folk. The fact that she could allegedly have poisoned Emmanuel and his friends out of jealousy and betrayal filled people with a mix of fury and disbelief. As more details surfaced, including her confession to the police, the anger in the community grew to a boiling point. Soon, it wasn't just gossip, it was a deep-seated rage. The community felt betrayed by one of their own, someone who had the privilege, power, and resources to help others but had instead used it to commit a horrible crime. The gathering. It didn't take long for a crowd to start gathering outside Aisha's father's house. People of all ages were there, some yelling, others crying, and many holding makeshift signs that read justice for Emmanuel and no mercy for Aisha. The once quiet neighborhood of Afashio was now echoing with the angry voices of neighbors and friends. They wanted justice and they wanted it now. Aisha must pay, an elderly woman shouted, shaking her walking stick in the air. Her voice cracked with emotion, her face wet with tears. She had known Samuel and Jeffrey since they were children. Their family lived just down the street, and she remembered them as lively boys who always greeted her politely. What kind of heartless person would do this? A young man in the crowd demanded. She grew up with everything. She never knew a day of suffering. And yet, she had the heart to kill those who were just trying to survive. It's unfair. The crowd agreed. shouting and chanting together, their anger fueling each other's. Everyone was agitated, everyone was angry, and no one really knew the real reason behind Aisha's decision. And so many stories and theories were thrown around. However, the truth of the fact was it was never Aisha's plan to poison all of them. She only wanted to get rid of Emmanuel, but his friends were unfortunate to be partakers of the evil soup. The security guards outside Haisha's father's compound looked worried. They knew the situation was dangerous. The gathering crowd was no longer just a group of grieving neighbors, it was becoming a mob, breaking through the gates. It wasn't long before someone in the crowd decided to take matters into their own hands. "Let's get her out here," a man yelled. In one swift movement, the mob surged forward, forcing the guards to step back as they pushed against the iron gates. Several men pounded on the gates, rattling them fiercely. The sound echoed through the neighborhood, each metallic clang stirring the crowd's rage further. "Bring her out. She has to face us. She has to answer for this evil act," someone shouted from the back. The mob only had one intention, and that was to manhandle Aisha and lynch her on the spot. The guards tried to block the gate, but there were too many people. With a loud creak, the gate gave way and the crowd flooded into the compound. The mob swept past the guards, pushing and shoving as they made their way toward the grand house. There were cries of anger, cries for justice, and amidst it all, a few shouts of revenge. Inside the house, Aisha and her parents had heard the commotion. Her father, Senator Suleiman, who had once felt untouchable in his position of power, looked pale and shaken. He knew the influence he held in the community, but he also understood that even his authority couldn't pacify the raw anger of a grieving community. He glanced at his daughter, who was trembling, her once arrogant demeanor replaced by fear and regret. "Daddy, please don't let them hurt me," Aisha whispered, clutching his arm. "We'll protect you," he said, though his own voice wavered. He turned to his wife. "Call the police. Tell them it's an emergency." But as her mother scrambled to find her phone, the mob had already reached the front steps. They pounded on the door, shouting for Aisha to come out. A few people threw stones, shattering the windows and sending glass raining down inside. Aisha shrieked, pressing herself against the wall, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. "You have to face them," Aisha, her father, said sternly. "They want answers, they want justice for what you've done." But even as he said it, he didn't know if facing them was the right choice. The crowd was furious, and he could see that their grief had turned into a dangerous rage. The mob's demands. "Come out," Aisha, a voice from outside, yelled. The crowd began chanting, "Justice, justice." Their voices grew louder with every passing second, a relentless demand that vibrated through the walls of the house. The noise was deafening, and Aisha covered her ears, feeling panic rise in her chest. Then the door finally opened, and Aisha, flanked by her father and mother, stepped out. The crowd fell silent for a moment, seeing the girl who had caused so much pain. Aisha looked out at the faces of the people she had grown up around, people she had ignored and thought beneath her. Now, they stared at her with contempt and disgust. A man at the front of the crowd pointed at her. "How dare you take their lives," he shouted. "You think your father's money can save you from this?" Another voice cried, "Those boys were like my sons. You have no idea what you've done to this community." The crowd surged forward, and Aisha stepped back, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of their anger, the heat of their hatred. She realized that the privilege she had once enjoyed meant nothing in the face of their grief. They wanted to see her suffer for what she had done, to feel the pain she had inflicted on them. Just as the crowd seemed ready to drag Aisha out, police sirens wailed in the distance. The mob hesitated, the flashing lights signaling the arrival of officers who quickly jumped out of their vehicles. The officers formed a protective line around Aisha and her family, urging the crowd to step back. "Everyone, calm down," an officer called out. "We understand your anger, but the law will handle this. Justice will be served, but not like this." The mob murmured angrily, but slowly began to disperse, realizing that any further violence would lead to their own arrest. Some of them yelled out threats, promising that they wouldn't rest until justice was done, but the police stood firm, ensuring that no harm came to Aisha in that moment. As the police escorted Aisha and her parents back into their home, her father let out a deep breath of relief. But Aisha's ordeal was far from over. She now knew that her community despised her and that she would live the rest of her days haunted by the life she had taken and the justice that awaited her. The town was shaken to its core. People spoke in hushed tones, recounting the tragedy and expressing disbelief that someone so young could be capable of such a terrible act. But as the days turned into weeks, the shock began to fade, replaced by a quiet understanding that such a tragedy held a deeper lesson. A reflection on Aisha's life. Aisha had been raised in privilege, shielded from hardship and taught that money and power could solve all problems. Her parents had given her everything she wanted, but they hadn't taught her to value others or to handle rejection with grace. She had never learned that love couldn't be bought, nor that people's hearts could not be controlled. When Emmanuel betrayed her, she felt a deep, blinding rage because she believed she had earned his loyalty by providing for him. In her mind, he owed her his love, and when he left her, she felt robbed. Her inability to cope with betrayal and rejection drove her to make a choice that would haunt her forever. If only she had been taught the value of forgiveness, of letting go, she might have walked a different path. Lessons to be learned. The tragic story of Aisha, Emmanuel, and their friends serves as a cautionary tale with powerful lessons. 1. The dangers of wealth without wisdom. Aisha was raised with everything she wanted, but she lacked the wisdom to use her resources responsibly. Her parents gave her material wealth, but neglected to instill in her values like kindness, humility, and forgiveness. 2. Love and control. Aisha's love for Emmanuel turned toxic when she felt that she could control him with money. True love is built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding, not on manipulation or financial influence. 3. Revenge is destructive. Revenge can seem satisfying in the moment, but it leads only to pain and loss. Aisha's decision to seek vengeance ultimately destroyed her life and claimed the lives of those she had once loved. 4. Forgiveness and letting go. Learning to let go of anger and resentment is a powerful gift. If Aisha had been able to forgive Emmanuel and move on, she might have found peace rather than facing a lifetime of regret. 5. Choices and consequences. Every action has consequences. Aisha's choice to harm others in her rage led to tragic consequences that could not be undone. This story reminds us all to consider our choices carefully, especially when emotions are running high. The moral of the story. The tale of Aisha Suleiman teaches that wealth and privilege are no substitutes for wisdom and compassion. True strength lies in learning to forgive, in valuing relationships over material possessions, and in understanding that love cannot be forced or bought. Each of us has the power to choose how we respond to life's challenges. Aisha's story is a sobering reminder that revenge and hatred only lead to destruction, while forgiveness, humility, and self-respect bring true peace and strength. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and put on the notification bell so you are notified whenever we post new epic true life stories. Till I bring to you another exhilarating true life story. This is True Story Africa.
Story Africa, hear the call, rise above the shadows tall. Voices strong and hearts so wide, together we'll take this ride.